Tunde had always been a dreamer. Growing up in the heart of Lagos, in a small, stuffy apartment he shared with his mother and younger sister, life was anything but comfortable. His mother worked tirelessly, selling vegetables in the local market. She would come home late in the evening, her feet swollen, her hands rough, but her voice always gentle when she talked to her children. She believed in hard work, and she believed that with patience, God would bless them. But Tunde didn't have patience. He wanted out of the life he had, and he wanted it now. It was his friend Sheyi who showed him another way. Sheyi had returned from Dubai, his body adorned in gold chains, his clothes branded with expensive logos, and a new confidence that was hard to miss. Tunde was in awe. How did Sheyi manage this transformation? The answer was simple: Yahoo Yahoo. Internet fraud. Sheyi explained how easy it was to make quick money if one knew the tricks of the trade. The idea of scamming foreign victims seemed distant enough for Tunde not to feel guilty. It wasn't as if he was hurting people he knew, he told himself. The allure was too much to resist. Tunde took the plunge. At first, it was just about learning the ropes: how to set up fake accounts, how to craft emails that would lure people in, and how to sweet-talk lonely victims. His natural charm worked in his favor. Within a few months, Tunde hit his first big jackpot. A naive woman in her 60s, looking for companionship, sent him $5,000. When he saw the money hit his account, he was overwhelmed with excitement. He wasn't Tunde the poor boy anymore. He was Tunde the hustler, the one who knew how to play the game. More money followed. Tunde bought a car, then another. He moved out of his mother's small apartment into a luxury flat on the island. He threw lavish parties every weekend, filling his house with music, women, and bottles of champagne. His friends looked at him with admiration. He was the one who made it out. He was the one living the life they all wanted. And it felt good. Too good. Tunde's transformation was the talk of the neighborhood. His shiny black Benz was always parked in front of his mother's small apartment whenever he visited. His mother, Mama Tunde, was proud of her son but was concerned. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She questioned him often, asking about his work, but Tunde always had vague answers. "It's online business, Mama," he would say, dismissing her concerns with a hug and a promise that he was doing just fine. With money came friends, lots of them. The kind who praised Tunde for every little thing, who laughed at his jokes no matter how dull, who cheered him on as he spent millions on bottles of champagne. The kind of friends who knew how to enjoy the good times, but never stuck around for the bad. Tunde was the king of his circle. He was the one everyone wanted to be around, and it felt intoxicating. The women, too, came in droves. Models, party girls, even university students. Everyone wanted a piece of Tunde's wealth. He reveled in the attention, moving from one beautiful woman to another, always in search of the next thrill. Life was fast and life was good. Yet, behind the scenes, cracks were beginning to form. His scams weren't hitting as often. Competition had grown fierce. Too many young men like him were getting into Yahoo Yahoo. The targets were getting wary, and his once successful formula wasn't yielding the same results. Expenses were piling up, and his lavish lifestyle demanded a steady stream of cash. The Benz needed maintenance, the flat rent was due, and the parties were not cheap. His mother kept praying. She would visit him sometimes, seeing the beautiful apartment, the expensive gadgets, and the flashy clothes. She would smile, but there was always a sadness in her eyes. "Tunde, remember that wealth gotten in a hurry can disappear just as quickly," she would say. But Tunde didn't want to hear it. He was determined to keep the money flowing, no matter what. Tunde's lifestyle began to catch up with him. The money stopped flowing as easily as it once did. His targets were no longer responding, and when they did, they were suspicious and difficult to convince. He spent long hours in front of his laptop, trying to make his scams work, but the returns were dwindling. He was running out of luck. The friends who had once cheered him on began to disappear. They had no use for a Tunde who wasn't buying the drinks, who wasn't throwing the parties. The women, too, moved on to richer men, those who still had the means to fund their expensive tastes. Tunde found himself alone in his luxury apartment, the silence deafening. He sold his Benz to cover the rent. He pawned his gold chains. He tried to keep up appearances, but it was clear to everyone that Tunde was no longer the big boy he used to be. His lavish lifestyle had come crashing down, and there was no one around to help him pick up the pieces. Tunde returned to his mother's apartment one evening, defeated. He hadn't visited in weeks, ashamed of what had become of him. Mama Tunde welcomed him with open arms, as if nothing had changed. She made him his favorite meal, pounded yam and egusi soup, and spoke to him gently, asking no questions about his struggles. She knew her son was hurting, but she also knew that he needed to find his way back on his own. Tunde lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything he had lost. He thought about the money, the friends, the women, but mostly he thought about the emptiness that had come with it all. He had chased after a dream that had turned into a nightmare, and now he was left with nothing. Desperation makes people do things they never thought they would. For Tunde, it meant seeking out a native doctor, a Babalawo known for helping people get rich quick. Tunde had heard about him from one of his old friends, someone who had also fallen on hard times. The native doctor, they said, could make anything happen for the right price. Tunde traveled to a remote village, deep in the heart of Ogun State, to find the Babalawo. The journey was long and tiring, but Tunde's mind was made up. He needed money, and he was willing to do whatever it took to get it. The native doctor's shrine was dark and filled with strange objects, animal skulls, feathers, and bottles filled with mysterious liquids. The air was thick with the smell of incense. The Babalawo, an old man with piercing eyes, listened as Tunde explained his situation. He wanted to be rich again, to have the life he once had. The Babalawo nodded slowly. "Riches come with a price," he said, his voice deep and raspy. "Are you willing to pay it?" Tunde swallowed hard. "Yes, anything," he replied, his voice shaking. The Babalawo looked at him for a long moment before speaking again. "The price is your mother," he said. "She must be sacrificed for you to regain your wealth." Tunde felt his blood run cold. His mother? The woman who had given him everything, who had loved him unconditionally, who had prayed for him even when he had lost his way. He hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. But greed is a powerful force. The thought of being rich again, of having everything he had lost, clouded his judgment. He nodded, agreeing to the ritual. The night before the ritual, Tunde sat in his room, staring at the flickering flame of the small candle he had lit. His mind was at war with itself. On one hand, his greed and desperation for wealth pushed him to follow through with the plan. On the other hand, the memories of his mother's love and sacrifices pulled him back from the brink. His thoughts raced, images of the lavish lifestyle he once had flashing before his eyes. The luxurious cars, the parties, the women who flocked to him. Then came the image of his mother, kneeling in prayer, her voice soft and pleading as she prayed for his protection and success. The conflict was unbearable. Tunde had convinced himself that this was his only chance to regain his wealth. He had tried everything else, but nothing had worked. His friends were gone, his influence had faded, and he was no longer the person everyone admired. He was just another broke man on the streets. And yet, the thought of sacrificing his mother, the woman who had raised him single-handedly, who had always believed in him, seemed like the ultimate betrayal. His heart raced as he considered what he was about to do. Could he really go through with it? Could he take the life of the woman who had given him everything, just for money? He closed his eyes and tried to silence the voice of guilt, but it was louder than ever. Still, he had already agreed to the ritual. There was no turning back now. The day of the ritual arrived, and Tunde's heart pounded with anxiety as he made his way to his mother's house. His hands were trembling as he knocked on the door. Mama Tunde, as always, greeted him with a warm smile. "Ah, my son, welcome. You're just in time for dinner," she said, turning back into the kitchen to prepare his meal. Tunde sat at the table, watching his mother move around the kitchen, her hands skillfully preparing the food she knew he loved. The smell of freshly cooked jollof rice filled the air, and Tunde's stomach churned with guilt. He had come here with the intention of taking her life for a ritual, but here she was, cooking for him with the same love and care she had always shown him. She set the plate of food in front of him, and as Tunde looked down at the steaming plate, the weight of what he was about to do hit him like a tidal wave. How could he go through with this? How could he betray the woman who had never asked for anything in return for her love, who had worked tirelessly to ensure he had a better life? He couldn't eat. He couldn't think straight. His mother sat down beside him, her hands folded in her lap as she offered a prayer of thanks for the food and for Tunde's presence. She prayed for him, as she always did, asking God to protect him, to guide him, to bless him with success. Tunde's eyes welled up with tears as he listened to her words. How could he ever repay this woman by taking her life? But the ritual had already been set. The native doctor was expecting him that night. If he didn't go through with it, he would lose everything: the chance to be rich again, to regain the status he had lost. The greed clawed at him, whispering in his ear that this was his only way out. As his mother finished her prayer, Tunde stood up abruptly. I need to go, Mama," he stammered, unable to meet her eyes. "Go? But you haven't even eaten," she said, her voice filled with concern. "I'll be back later," he muttered before rushing out the door, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like a suffocating blanket. Tunde arrived at the native doctor's shrine later that night, the same dark atmosphere surrounding him as before. The Babalawo was waiting, his eyes gleaming in the dim light of the candles that flickered around the room. "You are ready?" the native doctor asked, his voice low and menacing. Tunde swallowed hard and nodded, though his legs felt like they would give out at any moment. He had never been more terrified in his life. The native doctor began to chant, his voice rising in intensity as he prepared the ritual. Tunde's head throbbed as the room seemed to close in around him. The air was thick, almost suffocating, as the smell of burning incense filled his lungs. His heart raced, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Then the Babalawo spoke, his words cutting through the air like a knife. "Now, bring your mother's spirit to me," he commanded, his eyes glowing with dark power. Tunde's chest tightened, and for a moment he hesitated. But the promise of wealth, of returning to the life he once knew, pushed him forward. He thought about everything he had lost, everything he could regain. Just as he was about to speak the incantation that would seal his mother's fate, a loud crash echoed through the room. The candles flickered wildly, and the air seemed to crackle with electricity. Tunde stumbled backward, his mind spinning. Suddenly, he felt a sharp, searing pain in his head. It was as if 1,000 knives were stabbing into his skull all at once. He screamed, clutching his head as he fell to the ground. The pain was unbearable, and his vision blurred as the world around him spun out of control. The native doctor stepped back, his face twisted in confusion. "What is happening?" he muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowing as he watched Tunde writhing on the floor. But the pain only grew worse, and soon, Tunde was no longer in control of his own body. He thrashed and screamed, his mind unraveling as madness took hold of him. His once sharp intellect, the same one that had allowed him to scam so many people, was now lost in a fog of confusion and delirium. In his final moments of clarity, Tunde heard the sound of his mother's voice echoing in his mind. She was praying for him, as she always had, asking God to protect him from harm. And then, as the darkness overtook him, he realized the truth. Her prayers had saved her. But he, consumed by greed and betrayal, was lost. The next day, word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Tunde had gone mad. People whispered about it in the market, in the streets, and in the churches. The once proud and wealthy young man was now a shadow of his former self, wandering the streets in tattered clothes, muttering incoherently to himself. His mother, Mama Tunde, was heartbroken. She had heard the news, but she couldn't understand what had happened to her son. She had prayed for him every day, asking God to guide him and keep him safe. How could this have happened? She found him wandering near the market, his eyes wild and unseeing. She rushed to him, tears streaming down her face, but Tunde didn't recognize her. He pushed her away, screaming nonsense as he stumbled down the road. The people who had once admired him now pitied him. Some even laughed, cruelly mocking his downfall. But Mama Tunde didn't care about their words. She only cared about her son. She followed him, trying to calm him, to bring him home, but he was lost in his madness. Still, she didn't give up. Every day she went looking for him, bringing food and water, hoping that one day he would remember who he was. She prayed for him constantly, asking God for a miracle, but deep down, She knew that her son had been consumed by his greed, and there was no easy way back. Tunde's story became a cautionary tale in the neighborhood. The young men who had once admired him now whispered about the price he had paid for his wealth. The same friends who had cheered him on at parties now shook their heads in regret, realizing how fragile their own lives were. The native doctor, too, heard about Tunde's madness and knew that it was the power of his mother's prayers that had protected her. He chuckled to himself, knowing that greed always came with a price. He had seen it before, and he would see it again. Young men chasing after quick wealth, only to lose everything in the process. But the lesson was clear. Wealth gained through deceit and evil deeds could never last. It was fleeting like the wind, and those who chased it would always pay the price. Though Tunde had lost everything, his wealth, his friends, his mind, his mother never stopped loving him. She visited him every day, even when he didn't recognize her, even when he screamed and pushed her away. She brought him food and water, and when she couldn't find him, she left it at the places she knew he wandered. Mama Tunde never gave up on her son, praying that one day he would return to her, that he would find redemption. She knew that the road back would be long and difficult, but she also knew that love and faith could overcome even the darkest of times. Moral lesson: the story of Tunde is a reminder of the dangers of greed and the consequences of ill-gotten wealth. Money gained through deceit and evil will always come at a price, and in the end, the cost may be more than one can bear. Tunde's fall from grace shows that no amount of wealth is worth losing one's soul, and that the love of a mother and the power of prayer can save even in the darkest moments. True success is built on hard work, honesty, and patience, not on shortcuts or sacrificing the people we love. Wealth may come and go, but integrity, family, and faith are what truly matter.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.